The Knight of Swords may be seen as a card with quite a straightforward meaning in one sense, and yet a hidden, esoteric heart underneath it. The Rider-Waite card shows this as well. The king wants to strive for a clarity of mind and an intellectual understanding of the world, and yet his throne is bedecked with these images of butterflies showing that his journey will end in a metamorphosis, and also these opposing crescent moons showing that although he wants to rise up above that world of emotion and intuition, it's going to form something of the foundation here, the foundation of the throne he sits on, in quite simple symbolic terms. The knight here on the Thoth deck appears to be moving very, very quickly upon his journey, and indeed elementally he is fire of air, and so that's quite an interesting symbol, and this will be central to actually understanding this card. The fire in air, not necessarily referring to physical fire, but the fire of the heart, the putting in of a passion into something, and so in terms of actual physical air, it could be quite a violent storm such as a hurricane or a twister. It would move very quickly, could certainly clear an area, but would cause a lot of destruction in its wake, and could also be prone to changing direction just as quickly as what it is moving in. However, we do see in a lot of literature this idea of having a burning passion, which then enables us to move forward quickly and enables us to see things with more clarity. Most famously, we see this as a secret in the book Think and Grow Rich by Napoleon Hill. Straight away, as soon as the book opens, he talks about you need this burning passion to manifest your desire. And so in more spiritual terms, we see people who say these prayers by reading them off cards, and they just repeat the words, but they don't actually even think about what they mean, and they don't passionately feel them or really even care whether anything happens or not. It's just a ritual. That's not going to actually achieve any results. Basically, nothing's going to happen if you just don't inject that burning passion into it. You have to get up off your chair and actually go out and take action in the physical world and move in the direction of where you want to go, and we can see that our knight is moving in a particular direction here, which is quite important, and we'll come back to that shortly. On the Tree of Life, as a knight or king, he's in Shokmar, which of course is that potent male spiritual force, as opposed to Binar, which we saw over on the Queen. Interestingly here, however, some systems link Neptune to the Sephiroth of Shokmar, and so we can see, perhaps looking back on the Rider-Waite card, those crescent moons representing that need for duality in order to actually make anything happen. So Neptune is going to have the elements, for example, of intuition coming across on there, and so Shokmar and Neptune put together would be wisdom in Shokmar and understanding in Neptune or Binar. And so there our duality comes in. The male passion or sexual creative energy travels across this Tree of Life with the capability, at least, of impregnating Binar, the womb of creation. And of course, if that was going to happen, there would actually be millions of this male creative force, sperm, racing towards the egg in terms of pure symbology, of course, and only one of them is going to actually get there. And so we can see this on the card, believe it or not. The knight is racing forwards here, and he's going in this direction, and he's not bothered about what else is going on around him. He wants to be the first to meet this goal, whatever it is in terms of its symbol. He wants to essentially win that race. And we can see on his crown the wings here, and these are really quite interesting. It's very difficult to see this, but there are actually cardinal compass points upon each of the strands of this crown, and so we can actually see north, east, south and west upon his crown. And this is coming from the top, of course, of his head, in his crown chakra area, his sahasrara, and this shows that his mind, his free will, can determine which direction he travels up in, and so it's showing do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law, because he makes a conscious decision on where his will is going to take him, and then he goes for it, and he doesn't stop until it's manifested. He's actually travelling, if we look at these cardinal points, in the direction of southeast. This is interesting and very esoteric. However, when we understand what this means, it actually describes the entirety of this card. This refers to one of the most popular and easily learned ceremonial magical works, the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, of which is often performed both before and after a magical working. It banishes any impurities from the magic circle of the ritual space and from the magician themselves. And the Lesser Banishing Ritual itself begins with a small ritual known as the Kabbalistic Cross, of where the 4 elements are invoked with divine names, and later on the names of archangels and divine names are vibrated or invoked into the 4 cardinal points. Now here we see something of interest to the card. He is, of course, fire and air in terms of his elemental symbology. And in this Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, one begins in the east and chants the tetragrammaton, Yod, He, Vav, He, and that represents the air. They then turn to the south and vibrate the name of Adonai, of which represents fire. And so with him travelling southeast, it represents both the fire and the air, of which this card actually symbolises. And more than this, we can see that he also pushes his swords forward into this southeast direction, and his arms are outstretched and his body is leaning forward upon this horse, so he really is moving very quickly in that direction. This also refers to the Lesser Banishing Ritual of the Pentagram, in that when these divine names are vibrated or invoked into these compass points, one does so by performing the sign of the Enterer, or the sign of Horus. And the point of doing this is to literally impregnate that astral plane, and it's a real rush forward of energy. You're projecting outwards this vibration of a divine name into that astral plane, basically the vibrations and frequencies around you. This sign of the Enterer rushing forward like that symbolises a powerful and active energy, and of course a powerful and active energy is exactly what we see here upon the Knight of Swords, and so that really does represent almost the entirety of the card in one symbol, which is rather quite wonderful. He does, however, carry 2 swords, and they're quite different from each other. They may, in more astrological terms, represent Gemini, of which we see with a connection all through these swords cards, and yet they can also be something of that duality of fire and air. Yet again, the long sword actually has upon it the symbol of air on its hilt, and the smaller sword, or the dagger, bears upon it the symbol of the sun, which of course is fire. And so he's putting both of these swords outwards into the astral plane. He's injecting his burning passion into it, and so they represent together this penetrating force of which cuts through illusion, and in terms of the Lesser Banishing Ritual, gets rid of what they call little nasties or impurities within the atmosphere. And so he's like cutting through all of the things that would have held him back, and he's seeing things clear. He's cleansed his entire environment and himself, and saying, right, there's nothing going to stop me now. Everything's clear, everything's ready for me to invoke, in terms of ceremonial magic as a symbol, invoke or manifest my goal, and nothing can stop me. And we also see on the card these swallows, these little birds here, which are flying with him in the same direction. These are Mercury, of which rules Gemini, if we're looking at it with the astrological terms, and yet perhaps more spiritually they can represent a coming abundance, and we'll come back to that in a second, as they can also simply represent our ability and our capacity to rise up and to see things with that new perspective and to cut through things. And yet, of course, this whole card is flying over the ocean underneath, which is the emotion. And so they're showing that they're still going to be guided in some way by an unseen vibration of emotion, of which we saw even on the Rider-Waite version of the card with those symbols on the throne. This is true will, and so although his will, his intention, as shown by those compass points on his crown, lets him decide with his own free choice which way he goes, it will always feel a pulling towards a particular goal, a particular way of being, of which is his true will. And so this is the love, of which is under the will. So do as thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will. So it's basically a representation of the law of Thelema. And yet, of course, these swallows can also represent that coming abundance. And we're about to move, of course, into the next suit of cards. And this is going to be discs. And so it's going to show a manifestation of abundance. And so the swallow is a bit of a good luck symbol here. It's showing that although this knight is prone to moving in all sorts of different directions and changing with his moods, he's going here in the right direction. It could even be his true will, of which is driving him onwards, because abundance will follow. And so to get the card shows you're going to want to break free of restrictions and of stagnation, of which is holding you back. Essentially banish it. Inject into your world divine names, which could be simply things that you love, things that you want to buy or go or experience. Be decisive with them. So say, yes, I do want to have them. Put together that plan. Make it sharp. Make everything around you in your world point towards it. And then go for it. And don't stop until you see it manifested.